I never thought my little sister would be the one to question everything I'd worked for. Growing up in small-town Nebraska, we were inseparable. Two kids dreaming of bigger things while watching corn grow endlessly under that vast Midwestern sky. Sarah was always the skeptical one, the one who'd roll her eyes when I talked about my plans to serve my country, to make a real difference in the world. When I graduated from the Air Force Academy and got recruited into intelligence work, I couldn't tell her the details. Hell, I couldn't tell anyone the details. My job with the Defense Intelligence Agency required a level of secrecy that meant my own family thought I was some kind of glorified paper pusher. Sarah would laugh whenever I mentioned work, making jokes about how I probably just sat in a cubicle all day pretending to be important. "Come on, Emma," she'd say during our weekly phone calls. "What do you actually do? File reports? Answer emails? It's not like you're some secret agent or something." Her voice always carried that familiar mix of affection and dismissal that only siblings can master. I'd bite my tongue, knowing I couldn't explain that I spent my days analyzing satellite imagery, coordinating with field operatives, and helping prevent threats most people would never even know existed. The worst part was watching her tell people at family gatherings that her sister had some made-up government job. She'd air quote with her fingers whenever she said it, rolling her eyes for emphasis. Our parents would try to defend me, but even they seemed confused about what exactly I did for a living. How could I explain that my work was classified at levels they'd never heard of? Last Christmas, things came to a head. Sarah had just gotten promoted to marketing director at her advertising firm in Omaha, and she was riding high on her success. During dinner, she started going on about real jobs and how some people just like to make themselves sound more important than they actually were. The whole family went quiet, but I knew she was talking about me. "At least I can tell people what I do for work," she said, looking directly at me across Mom's dining room table. "I don't have to make up mysterious stories about classified this and confidential that." Her boyfriend nodded along, probably thinking he was supporting his girlfriend, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. I excused myself early that night, driving back to my apartment in Omaha feeling more isolated than ever. Here I was, dedicating my life to protecting national security, working 16-hour days analyzing intelligence from around the globe, and my own sister thought it was all an elaborate lie. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was fighting to protect a country that included people who didn't even believe my job existed. But life has a funny way of proving points when you least expect it. 3 months later, I got selected for a recruitment campaign the DIA was launching. They needed real agents to appear in materials aimed at attracting top-tier talent to intelligence work. It was a rare opportunity to step out of the shadows, even just a little bit. I never imagined that decision would change everything between Sarah and me. The recruitment campaign was unlike anything I'd ever been involved with during my 7 years at the DIA. The agency was facing a talent shortage, particularly in technical intelligence analysis, and they'd decided to take an unprecedented approach, showing real faces of real agents to demonstrate that intelligence work wasn't just about shadowy figures in dark suits. When my supervisor, Colonel Martinez, called me into his office that Tuesday morning in March, I thought I was in trouble. Instead, he slid a folder across his desk with a classification level I rarely saw outside of operational briefings. "Agent Thompson, we want you to consider participating in a public-facing recruitment initiative," he said, his weathered face serious but not unkind. "Your background, your technical expertise, and frankly, your ability to represent what modern intelligence work actually looks like. It's exactly what we need." I stared at the folder, not quite processing what he was saying. Public-facing meant visible. Visible meant my family might finally understand that my job wasn't some elaborate fiction I'd constructed to make myself feel important. "Sir, I'm not sure I understand. Are we talking about interviews, speaking at universities?" I asked, thinking about the occasional recruitment events I'd heard other agents mention. Colonel Martinez leaned back in his chair, a slight smile playing at the corners of his mouth. "Bigger than that, Thompson. We're talking billboards, digital campaigns, maybe even some television spots. The kind of visibility that shows Americans that their intelligence community is made up of real people doing real work to keep them safe." My heart started racing. Billboards. The kind Sarah drove past every day on her commute between Omaha and Lincoln for client meetings. the kind that would make it impossible for her to keep dismissing my career as some elaborate government charade. The campaign focuses on technical intelligence specialists, he continued, opening the folder to reveal mock-ups and strategic documents. We want to show young people, especially women in STEM fields, that there are paths in intelligence work they might never have considered. Your work in satellite imagery analysis, your role in the cyber threat assessment team, it's exactly the kind of real, impactful work we need to highlight. I thought about all those family dinners, all those eye rolls, all those times Sarah had made me feel like I was living some kind of elaborate lie. The opportunity to finally show everyone, what I actually did with my life, felt almost too good to be true. What would this involve exactly? I asked, trying to keep my voice professional even though my pulse was hammering. Photo shoots, interviews about your work, within security parameters, of course. We'd feature you alongside other agents from different specialties. The goal is to humanize what we do while still maintaining operational security. He paused, studying my expression. I won't lie to you, Thompson. This is a big step. Once your face is out there associated with the agency, there's no going back to complete anonymity. I thought about Sarah's voice on our last phone call, that same dismissive tone she'd used since I started this career. Maybe it was time she learned what her big sister actually did for a living. I took the folder home that night, spreading the documents across my kitchen table like pieces of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. The mock-up images showed professional headshots of agents, people who looked like teachers, engineers, analysts, normal people doing extraordinary work. One sample billboard caught my attention. A woman about my age standing confidently in front of a wall of monitors, the tagline reading, "Protecting America's Future Through Intelligence Excellence." The decision should have been straightforward. This was a career opportunity, a chance to contribute to national recruitment efforts while finally proving to my family that my work mattered. But as I stared at those glossy proposals, all I could think about was Sarah's face across that Christmas dinner table, the way she'd looked at me like I was some kind of fraud. I called my mentor, Dr. Rebecca Chen, who'd transitioned from active intelligence work to training new analysts. She'd been through her own family struggles when she started her career 20 years ago, and I trusted her perspective more than anyone's. "Emma, you're overthinking this," she said, after I explained the situation. "The question isn't whether you should prove something to your sister. The question is whether you believe this campaign serves a greater purpose." But I couldn't separate those two things. For 7 years, I'd watched Sarah build her marketing career, while dismissing mine as some kind of government fantasy. I'd bitten my tongue through countless conversations where she'd imply that my work wasn't real, wasn't valuable, wasn't worth the secrecy and sacrifice it required. The recruitment campaign felt like vindication wrapped in professional opportunity. 3 days later, I walked back into Colonel Martinez's office and accepted the assignment. The process moved faster than I'd expected. Within 2 weeks, I was sitting in a photography studio in downtown Washington, D.C., surrounded by lighting equipment and backdrops that looked nothing like my usual work environment. The photographer, an energetic woman named Lisa who specialized in government campaigns, kept encouraging me to look confident but approachable. "Think about why you do this work," she said, as she adjusted her camera settings. "What drives you every morning when you walk into that building?" I thought about the satellite images I'd analyzed just that morning, tracking potential threats that could affect millions of Americans who'd never know how close danger had come. I thought about the late nights spent coordinating with field teams, the satisfaction of connecting dots that others had missed, the weight of responsibility that came with protecting people who didn't even know they needed protection. The camera clicked, and I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about proving Sarah wrong anymore. This was about showing the world that intelligence work wasn't conducted by faceless government drones, but by real people who'd chosen to dedicate their lives to something bigger than themselves. 2 months later, the campaign launched. I'd almost forgotten about the whole thing, buried as I was in a new project analyzing cyber threats from Eastern Europe. Then my phone rang at 7:23 on a Thursday morning. Sarah's name lit up the screen, and for the first time in years, her voice didn't carry that familiar note of skepticism. "Emma," she said, and I could hear something I'd never heard before, a mixture of shock, pride, and what might have been a little bit of awe. "I need to talk to you about something I saw on my drive to work this morning." My heart stopped. I knew exactly what she'd seen before she even said another word, but I let her continue, gripping my phone tighter as I waited for her reaction. There's this massive billboard on I-80, right before the Lincoln exit. Sarah's voice was barely above a whisper. It's you, Emma. It's actually you, in your uniform, with all these official government logos and everything. The Defense Intelligence Agency. She paused, and I could hear her breathing heavily. Jesus, Emma, what the hell do you actually do? I closed my eyes, feeling 7 years of frustration and hurt finally beginning to crack open. But instead of the vindication I'd imagined, all I felt was a strange mixture of relief and sadness. My little sister had spent all this time thinking I was living some elaborate lie, and now she was confronting the reality that she'd been wrong about everything. Sarah, I tried to tell you. No, you didn't, she interrupted, her voice getting sharper. You gave me vague answers and mysterious comments about classified work. You never told me you were important enough to be on a freaking government recruitment billboard. Do you know how that makes me feel? How stupid I feel right now? I could hear the hurt creeping into her voice, and suddenly I realized this conversation wasn't going the way I'd fantasized it would. In my mind, she'd see the billboard and immediately apologize, finally understanding that my work was real and important. Instead, she sounded angry and betrayed, like I'd been deliberately keeping secrets just to make her look foolish. I couldn't tell you details because of security clearances, I said, trying to keep my voice calm. Everything I do requires, but you could appear on a billboard. Sarah's voice cracked slightly. You could put your face out there for thousands of people to see, but you couldn't trust your own sister with the truth about your job. The accusation hit harder than I'd expected. She was right, in a way. I'd chosen to go public with my work partly to prove her wrong, but I'd never considered how that decision would make her feel. From her perspective, I'd been holding back information that I was apparently willing to share with complete strangers. It's not that simple, I started, but she cut me off again. My coworkers are calling me right now, Emma. They're sending me pictures of my sister on a government billboard, asking me why I never mentioned that you work for some elite intelligence agency. Do you know what I told them yesterday when someone asked about your job? I said you probably pushed papers around at some boring government office. I could hear her starting to cry, and my chest tightened. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. I'd wanted her to understand, to finally respect what I did for a living. Instead, I'd humiliated her in front of her colleagues and made her question everything she thought she knew about our relationship. Sarah, please, let me explain. I have to go, she said, her voice thick with tears. I have a client meeting in 20 minutes, and I need to figure out how to explain to everyone that I've been completely wrong about my own sister's life for the past 7 years. The line went dead, leaving me staring at my phone in my empty apartment, wondering how my moment of triumph had turned into such a disaster. I sat in my apartment for 20 minutes after Sarah hung up, staring at my phone and replaying every word of our conversation. The silence felt heavier than any classified briefing I'd ever attended. I'd spent so long imagining this moment, the vindication, the apology, the recognition, that I'd never considered how my secrecy might have affected her all these years. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom. Honey, Mrs. Henderson from down the street just called. She saw you on a billboard and wanted to know if it was really our Emma. I'm so proud, but why didn't you tell us about this campaign? Even my parents were finding out about my career from strangers. I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. Colonel Martinez would understand. He'd warned me that going public would have personal consequences I couldn't predict. I just hadn't expected those consequences to feel like losing my sister all over again. Around noon, I drove to Omaha, taking the same route Sarah used for her commute. When I saw the billboard for the first time, my breath caught in my throat. There I was, 20 feet tall, in my dress uniform with the DIA seal prominently displayed. The tagline read, "Defending America through Intelligence Excellence," and underneath, in smaller text, "The Defense Intelligence Agency, real people, real impact." I pulled over at a gas station and just stared at it. Dozens of cars passed by every minute, their drivers seeing my face, reading about my work, learning that the DIA existed and mattered. For the first time in my career, I wasn't invisible, but the person I'd most wanted to see this, my sister, felt further away than ever. My phone rang. Sarah's name appeared on the screen, and I answered before I could lose my nerve. "I'm looking at it right now," she said, her voice calmer but still strained. I drove here during my lunch break because I needed to see it again, to make sure it was real. Sarah, Let me talk first, she interrupted, but gently this time. I've been thinking about this all morning, and I realized something. You've been trying to tell me for years, haven't you? All those times I made jokes about your fake job, you'd get this look on your face, like you wanted to say something, but couldn't. I felt tears starting to form. I wanted to tell you everything, every single day. Do you know how hard it's been? Listening to you dismiss my work when I can't defend myself? But why this? She asked, and I could hear genuine confusion in her voice. Why agree to be on a billboard when you've kept everything secret for so long? I took a deep breath, knowing this was the moment that would determine whether we could repair what had been broken between us. Because I was tired of you thinking I was a fraud. Because I wanted you to be proud of me instead of embarrassed. Because I've spent 7 years feeling like my own sister didn't respect me. The silence stretched between us, filled with years of misunderstanding and hurt feelings. Finally, Sarah spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Emma, I was never embarrassed of you. I was jealous. Those 4 words changed everything. Jealous? I repeated, my voice cracking as I gripped the phone tighter. Sarah, what are you talking about? You left, Emma, she said, and I could hear her crying again. You graduated from the Air Force Academy. You moved to Washington. You got this important government job that you couldn't even talk about. Meanwhile, I stayed in Nebraska, working at the same advertising firm for 5 years, living in the same small world we grew up in. I stared at the billboard, seeing my own face looking back at me with confidence I didn't feel in this moment. But you're successful. You got promoted. You have a great boyfriend. You're doing amazing work. In Omaha, she interrupted, making advertisements for car dealerships and furniture stores, while my sister was off doing something so important and classified that she couldn't even tell her own family about it. Do you know what that felt like? Knowing that whatever you were doing was so far above my level that I wasn't even allowed to know what it was. The pieces started falling into place. All those jokes about my fake job, all the eye-rolling and dismissive comments, they weren't coming from a place of disbelief. They were coming from a place of hurt. She'd felt left out, excluded from a part of my life that seemed more important than anything in hers. So I convinced myself it couldn't be that important, she continued, her voice getting stronger. I told myself you were probably just exaggerating, that it was some boring desk job that you were making sound more mysterious than it actually was. It was easier than admitting that my big sister had moved on to this whole other level of existence that I'd never be part of. I felt like I'd been punched in the chest. Sarah, you're my little sister. You're the most important person in my life. Nothing I do at work changes that. But you chose work over us, she said, and the pain in her voice was unmistakable. Every family gathering, every phone call, there was this wall between us that got higher every year. You'd sit there listening to me talk about my little marketing campaigns while you were probably saving the world or something, and I could see it in your eyes, like you were humoring me. That's not true, I said, but even as the words left my mouth, I wondered if she was right. Had I been condescending? Had my inability to share my work made me seem like I thought I was better than her? And now I find out from a billboard that you're important enough for the government to put your face on a recruitment campaign. Not from you, Emma. From a highway sign. Her voice broke completely. My own coworkers knew more about my sister's career than I did. I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of 7 years of misunderstanding crushing down on me. I'd been so focused on wanting her respect that I'd never considered how my secrecy was affecting her self-worth. She hadn't been dismissing my work because she didn't believe it was real. She'd been protecting herself from feeling inadequate compared to a sister whose life seemed too important to share. Sarah, I never meant... I know you didn't, she whispered, but that doesn't change how much it hurt. We sat in silence for what felt like hours, both of us crying on opposite ends of a phone call, separated by the same highway where my face now stared down at thousands of strangers every day. The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd finally found a way to tell the world what I did for a living, but in doing so, I'd discovered how badly I'd failed at being a sister. I need to see you, I said finally, my voice hoarse from crying. Not in a month, not next weekend. Today. Right now. Emma, I'm at work. I have 3 client meetings this afternoon. Sarah, please. I looked up at the billboard again, at my own confident expression promoting a career that had somehow cost me the relationship that mattered most. I've spent 7 years putting my job before our family, before you. I can't do it anymore. I heard her take a shaky breath. Where are you? Sitting in a gas station parking lot, staring at my own face on a billboard, realizing I've been the worst sister in the world. You're not the worst sister, she said. And for the first time in our conversation, I heard a hint of the warmth that used to define our relationship. You're just complicated. Can you get away from work? Even for an hour? Another pause. There's a coffee shop on Dodge Street near my office. Brewski's. Can you find it? I'll find it. 30 minutes later, I was sitting in a corner booth at Brewski's, nervously shredding a napkin while I waited for Sarah to arrive. When she walked through the door, I barely recognized her. She looked older than I remembered, more professional in her tailored blazer and pencil skirt, but her eyes were red from crying and she looked as nervous as I felt. She slid into the booth across from me, and for a moment we just stared at each other. This was my little sister, the girl who used to follow me around our backyard in Nebraska, asking a million questions about everything. When had we become strangers? I saw the billboard again on my way over here, she said quietly. You look really official. Important. I don't feel important right now, I admitted. I feel like I've screwed up everything that actually matters. Sarah reached across the table and touched my hand, the first physical contact we'd had in months. Tell me about your job, Emma. The real job. Not the classified parts, just what it's like to be you. So I did. For the first time in 7 years, I told my sister about my life. I told her about the long hours analyzing satellite imagery, about the weight of knowing things that could affect millions of people, about the loneliness of not being able to share the victories and frustrations with anyone who mattered to me. I told her about the nights I'd stayed awake wondering if I was making a difference, about the colleagues who'd become my only confidants, about how much I'd missed having her to talk to about everything. I never wanted you to feel left out, I said, gripping her hand tighter. I wanted you to be proud of me, but I couldn't figure out how to make that happen without breaking rules that could end my career. Sarah squeezed my hand back. I am proud of you, Emma. I've always been proud of you. I was just too hurt and jealous to say it. We talked for 3 hours that afternoon, sharing stories and feelings that had been building up for years. Sarah told me about her struggles with imposter syndrome at work, how she'd always felt like she was playing catch-up in a world that seemed to value flashy achievements over steady progress. I told her about the nights I'd come home to my empty apartment, wishing I could call her and complain about a difficult case or celebrate a breakthrough, but knowing I couldn't share any of it. You know what's funny? Sarah said, stirring her third cup of coffee. I used to practice conversations where I'd ask you about work, trying to find the right words that might get you to open up. But every time I tried, it felt like you were looking right through me. I was trying to protect you, I said, realizing how inadequate that sounded, and trying to protect myself from having to lie to you directly. But I didn't need protection, Emma. I needed my sister. That evening, Sarah drove with me back to the billboard. We stood there in the parking lot of a truck stop, looking up at my face illuminated by floodlights against the darkening Nebraska sky. Other travelers stopped to look too, some taking pictures, others just reading the recruitment message with curiosity. It's weird seeing you up there, Sarah said, leaning against my car, but also kind of amazing. Like, that's my sister helping to keep America safe. That's your sister who forgot that keeping you safe included keeping our relationship safe too, I replied. Sarah turned to face me, her expression serious but not angry anymore. We both messed up, Emma. I could have been more supportive instead of defensive. I could have trusted that you had good reasons for the secrecy, instead of assuming the worst. Over the following months, we rebuilt our relationship slowly and deliberately. Sarah started asking different questions about my work, not probing for classified details, but genuinely wanting to understand what my daily life was like. I learned to share what I could while respecting what I couldn't, finding ways to let her into my world without compromising security. The billboard campaign ran for 6 months, and every time Sarah drove past it, she'd send me a picture with some silly caption. Your hair looks good today, sis. Or, still keeping America safe, I see. It became our inside joke, a symbol of how we'd found our way back to each other. When the campaign ended and the billboards came down, Sarah called me that evening. I'm going to miss seeing your face on my commute, she said. It reminded me every day that my sister does something important, something that matters. You do something important too, I told her. You're my sister. That's the most important job anyone could have in my life. A year later, Sarah got engaged to her boyfriend, and she asked me to be her maid of honor. During her wedding speech, she mentioned how proud she was of her sister's service to our country, but more importantly, how grateful she was that we'd learned to be sisters again. As I stood there in my bridesmaid dress, watching her dance with her new husband, I realized that the billboard had given me something more valuable than professional recognition. It had given me back my family,